Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to What's the Deal with Adam and Neil. This morning is a little different than most episodes, partially because it's the first time I'm by myself and also I'm on vacation with our family. And our intention was to make a funny episode with Matt and I talking shark jokes. We've labeled this week Shark Week. And we want initially we wanted to have some silly elements and then talk about scripture a little bit. But in light of everything that's been happening as a nation, I feel compelled to talk through that a little bit. So I woke up. It's early here. I'm going to send this forward to Jason, who will load it. At 9:30 for all of us. It's refreshing to be able to sit and have some time with the Lord right at dawn. And yeah, so here I've been for a little bit reading scripture, praying about the state of our country, and I want to share a couple thoughts for many of us, particularly our legacy church family. I think there's things that we need to be on the same page about, and that you guys need to hear from me. And so, to get us started, there's a couple passages that really stand out to me about what's been happening, and maybe you're kind of confused. Maybe you're struggling to understand why things are in disarray, or um, maybe even with George Floyd's killing, you find yourself struggling to empathize. Uh, my initial reaction is to just uh, tell those of you who are racist to stop being racist, or in if you think racist thoughts, I want to tell you things like from The Sandlot, where he says, "If you were thinking, you shouldn't have thought that." But I'm realizing like it's not that easy for you guys. So let's just use scripture and remind us of some really important truths regarding our interaction to others, our love to others, our potential discrimination toward others. And one of them that stands out is a very familiar passage out of Luke chapter 10. And it's a story in which Jesus is talking uh, to a lawyer specifically. Sorry, I'm looking at my coffee cup. I don't want it to have it tip over. And I found myself in this story. Jesus is talking about, he starts to tell this parable about a guy that was all beat up and on the side of the road, and then a priest and a Levite walk by separately and ignore the guy. Now, that story really stands out to me the more and more I'm in the role I'm in, because I'm a pastor, and it's easy to um, it's a little more easy to relate to that story because there are needs that kind of come by my plate all the time, and it'd be easy to just walk by them and leave them. But then here's the kicker: is this third guy. So you have the priest and the Levite, and then you have another guy named the Samaritan, hence the Good Samaritan idea. He walks by the man that was beat up, and he cares for the man. And the first word it used for this guy is it says he has compassion on him. And when I read that this morning, I found myself thinking that word compassion is probably one of the biggest distinguishing marks that we're talking about here when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to being a nation that is divided, and just all the issues that are happening. In the story, you have the Samaritan. He has compassion. So what does he do? Well, he takes care of the man. He binds him up, and he uses his donkey to carry him to a nearby inn, and he pays the innkeeper to take care of him. And he comes back and even finishes off the bill. And one of the final words in the whole parable is, "The man had mercy on the guy." And and in the same way, God will show us mercy. I find myself with that story just moved by the idea of compassion. And as I watch a lot of videos, as I read a lot of comments, it would do well for many of us to have greater compassion toward others, particularly if you don't understand their viewpoint, if you don't understand their pain, if you don't understand their protest, if you don't understand the injustice. Well, pray for compassion. Pray that you would find yourself moved in a way that is not just in your mind, but like a compassion that is deep within your gut, and it moves you to some sort of action in a certain way. And what that looks like can be very different. But the key word here is compassion. I think when I look around, what I see is a strong lack of compassion, and that's not only unfortunate, but that's really sad. And if you're a Christian, all throughout Scripture, we see these moments in which Jesus is moved to compassion. A classic one is when he went to feed the 5,000, and he was moved to compassion, and then he did this sign. And so pray, if you're not feeling compassion, pray that the Lord would stir that within you, and then watch what he does. He might start giving you compassion in a way that you've not felt before. And yeah, so anyway, that story stands out. And another one stands out is the whole book of Philemon. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's a letter written to a guy named Philemon by the Apostle Paul. And there's this phrase that Paul uses a few times in it. And he talks about how Philemon refreshes his heart. So Paul says, like you've refreshed my heart. And he says that in a variation of that a couple times in the letter. And it's a really unique phrase. And I find myself reading that thinking that's a really good encouragement to all of us, that we would say words that would refresh others' hearts. We would say words and have an attitude and have a perspective and work through both this current challenge as well as all the stuff that is yet to come. We would work through them all with an attitude in which will refresh the hearts of others, mainly by our words. And as I look at stuff, especially related to racism and discrimination, it seems like words and actions are a big part of that. And so I challenge you to refresh the hearts of others. Now, when we think about all this stuff with racism and discrimination as a whole, I think one of the challenges, this is a little bit more like my pastoral approach, there's a lot of answers that are being proposed, although I guess I'm really not seeing as many answers as I would suspect to see. But there's a lot of opinions out there. Most of the stuff I'm seeing says just stop it, stop being racist. As a pastor, the whole stop it phrase never works. It's a phrase I tell my kids sometimes because they're about to put their finger in an electrical outlet, and I'll yell like don't do that, or they hit each other, and I'm like stop it. But when it comes to behavior, the stop it phrase has a very, very limited application. And people don't change unless their heart is changed. And if they do, I'm curious, and I'm totally open to hearing some examples of that. But generally speaking, you can't legislate heart change. You can't legislate morality and say, well, if this is just written in the books, now people are going to start acting this way. It's not it's not how that works at all. And so, as a Christian, recognizing the transforming, I'll say that again, the transforming work of Christ, my life, in my family, in our church family, it allows me to see that, when God stirs a work in our heart, then we begin to behave and act differently. And that's where He begins to change us in our actions. And so if you're looking around just struggling, you're like, why are people still racist? Why are they still mean toward one another? Why do they have an attitude or actions or words that are just disgraceful? Well, why do they struggle to bestow dignity to somebody? Why do they think that their skin color or that their opportunities make them better than somebody else? You know, a lot of the reason why, kind of on a deeper scale than just what you might be reading on a Facebook post or hearing in the news, a lot of the stuff goes down to our sin nature. And this is a little more my jam. So I won't talk about laws that we might need. Um, Not that I'm opposed to it. It's just for me, my initial response when I see all this stuff is it's really looking at our sin nature and how we are historically people who we pridefully find ways to identify that we are better than somebody else. And this has happened throughout human society. This is, I've seen this, my whole life, despite being born in the 80s, after all sorts of stuff that was already put in the books as a nation, just our country alone. We're not talking about all the other countries that have endured this and continue to endure this. But there's a lot of there's a lot of laws that have been in place since I've been alive, and yet it hasn't changed people's behavior. Isn't that interesting? I would take that back to the lack of the transforming work of Christ in their life. And so when you look at what God can do, He takes somebody and He begins to change their heart, which then leads to a difference in their perspective towards others and their love towards others. And so for me, a big step for me and for our church is to pray and ask the Lord to stir an awakening that allows people to respond to Him. Not just get with it and stop discriminating toward others, but for God to stir within us, if we are unsaved, a desire to be right with God and allow Him to change us from the inside out. And then if we are saved, for Him to for us to ask Him to continue to prune us and to change us and to make us more into the image of Christ. And if you have any inklings or maybe you're very overt in racist thinking and behavior, you submit that to God and you ask Him to change that. There's more there. There's a few other practical things I can recommend, but I find myself thinking the very first thing begins with your heart and how you view and how seriously you recognize that all people are created in God's image. You have the words out of Genesis 1 are not just made up. That's not just some sort of novel. But when God creates man and woman, Adam and Eve, He explicitly states that they're created in God's image. And that is true for all people. Uh, I think a challenge that I see with some of these elements of injustice, where people are like horrified that we are still discriminatory towards others, is I think I'm kind of like, are you surprised by that? I mean, there's so many things in our country that are so godless. We kill millions of babies every year. We have no problem ignoring our greed in our own personal lives or as a nation on the backs of others in order to achieve what we want. Yet we look at other things and try to point the sin out of others. And so I guess and I could go on with this because that's kind of a really hot topic, but I don't want to take away from the primary message regarding racial injustice to talk about all the other pretty strongly problematic issues that we see traces of, we see major chunks of in our own church family. And so I don't want to talk about all those things. Maybe we can save that for Thursday or something. But generally speaking, if someone's horrified that racism occurs, I thought as well, it's unacceptable. It needs to stop. This is I'm just so like saddened that we're continuing to treat other people this way. However, these are the natural outcomes of lives that are not surrendered to God, and especially at a national level, and all that we do celebrate. And so, uh, anyway, so those are some initial thoughts here this morning. Um, I encourage you all as a church family to be very prayerful for our own community, prayerful for our nation, of course. I do think it's important for us to be aware of like issues on the national level, but I really challenge us to strongly and proactively cultivate what we need to in our own community. And what I mean by that is if all these communities and churches are caring for their own areas really well, then you'll have this larger effect in which like a state or a nation is then uh, healthy, or you'll have pockets that are kind of healthy, and so then we can reach out. We can help other areas that need extra support in different ways. And so when I think about this stuff, I think it's important. We have the platforms of social media to be able to talk at a national level if needed. So like anybody around the world can see this or your post or whatever it is. But the reality is my relationships are here in Greene County. My relationships are with our church family primarily. And so I feel exhorted by the Lord to really pour into those relationships and challenge one another if we see areas of discrimination or racism, and and try to exhort one another in the Lord on those matters. And so as I think about this, like there's something that just kind of happens periodically, and I feel like it's a pretty practical example of, an element in our conversations that needs to be cut out. Now, I think this is sort of displays underlying racism. Maybe it doesn't to you. I don't know, but something common that I interact with within our church or within our county. I don't know why this is, but I've seen this for years. And that is that if someone's telling me a story and the story, like their story, like their interaction with somebody, a conversation they have with somebody, or I don't know, maybe there's an accident involving a couple cars or some sort of interaction that involves a few people. For whatever reason, if they're telling me the dialogue from this other person, if that person happens to be black, they'll tell me, and this tall black guy said this, or this black woman said this, and I'm thinking, uh, oh, are you? I'm kind of sarcastically in my head thinking, oh, you're just painting a very rich texture to this story as if you were an author of a novel, so I can understand what skin color the character is, so I can paint it in my head. But that's not why you're telling me that. You're telling that because for some reason you find yourself needing to distinguish that a person's skin color is different than yours. You don't tell me the skin color of everyone else in the story, just that one person. And that happens a lot. Now, I don't know, I'm not saying that that comment is racist. I'm not saying that you can't give some detail. There actually might be a very specific reason that you're telling me that detail, but usually it has nothing to do with the story. And I just think to myself, huh, like, do you just not have so many friends that are black that you have to distinguish that? Um, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that's about. And I don't really need to know motives, but I bring that up as an example, something that's really practical, really tangible. Maybe there is some underlying distinguishing that you might have in your head, and you can indicate that and recognize that by even some simple stories. And so, full disclosure, I kind of even hate bringing that example up because this is going to happen even this week, talking to somebody, and they might find themselves like, oh no, now Adam's judging me. But just so you know, I'm not, but I do bring this up. As your pastor, if you're in a church family, I think it's a really simple example of just checking your heart. When you tell stories, are you getting into the details of just everyone else's skin color, not your own? And if so, I don't know how it's pertinent. Um, and yeah, so that's just a thought there. But overall, those are some of my morning uh, thinking, mainly prayer for us, but definitely relating to the Good Samaritan and Luke 10, and then Philemon's words that are refreshing others in the Lord, and that's in the letter in the book of Philemon. So with that, that's our episode this morning. I want to thank you all for joining us. It's a little different again, and hopefully on Thursday we're back. Matt and I plan to have an episode. We have some really good content. We prepared it for you guys, but I changed it this morning, and so yeah, Thursday we'll do something different. I think we'll see.